Hello, and we are looking at the first reading from Isaiah. It is a short one, but powerful one. It's chapter 44, verses 6 through 8. And if you want to get a little feeling for it, a little better feeling for it, you can continue reading on. If you want to start at chapter 44, but continue especially reading on about this idea of idol worship and why would you go about doing that. So um, let's take a look at it, and you sort of get this sense, if you just sort of listen to the words, you sort of get a sense that God is on trial here. And I believe it really is the case, because here it is, the Israelites are in Babylon. They've been in there probably for a couple of decades now. We've talked already about that a little bit. They've been conquered by the Babylonians and taken to their country, and the Babylonians are like they are the major powers of the world, not only militarily but economically too. They are the major player of the world here at this time. And so, if we look at the consequences of this, you can imagine is that the Israelites are going, oh my goodness, what's up with this? We're stuck here. We thought we had this most powerful God, and it certainly doesn't look that way. And so you can sort of see the scene here of God being put to the test here. It's like, the Israelites are saying, well, look at this situation here. We're not in our home country, which meant everything to the Israelis. We're captured. We're in exile in Babylon. We have all these things going on in Babylon, the city of Babylon and the country of Babylon there, in terms of, all these things, these practices that aren't familiar with us and we're trying to stay away from. And so that sort of is what Isaiah is talking about. That's sort of what's happening to the Israelites during this time. And Isaiah is trying to give them hope. That's what Isaiah is trying to do. So let's listen to the words or you can read along, where Isaiah 44, verse 6 through 8. Thus says the Lord, the King of Israel and his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts. I am the first and I am the last. Besides me, there is no God. Who is like me? Let them proclaim it. Let them declare and set it forth before me. Who has announced from of old the things to come? Let them tell us what is yet to be. Do not fear or be afraid. I have not told you from of old and declared it. Have I not told you from the old and declared it? You are my witnesses. Is there any God besides me? There is no other rock. I know not one. All right. I do like the thought here is it sort of gives us another view of God. This God who loves us so much, and who's mushy and who just is peaceful and stuff like that. And this is really sort of God, getting in our face here, getting in the Israelites' face, and saying, who is like me? And especially if we think of, especially the Israelites living in Babylon, there's all these other small gods, small g, floating around, all these different, religions floating around, these different ideologies floating around. And, they're being caught up in this really sort of current of all this stuff happening here. And God is reminding them through their prophet Isaiah that, hey, who is like me? Who has told of things to come? And I could just sort of picture God going, putting his arms around, on his side, and go, I'll wait for you to come up with an answer here. Who is like me? And the answer here is just basically no one. It's a resounding no one. And Isaiah is saying, since there is no one like our God, let's make sure we don't give up hope. So there is some vocabulary that we need to hear. We have four sort of things of God. We have, thus says the Lord, this talking about our God. In verse 6, the King of Israel, that means that, here is the leader of Israel, the Redeemer, and the Lord of hosts. The Lord of hosts is more of a military term, but Redeemer might be one that you haven't heard, or you may have heard and you might not have understand it so much. And what happens is with the Redeemer is this like an Israelite, a person might fall into hard times and might, maybe his crops have failed year after year, maybe through drought, maybe through whatever. And all of a sudden it becomes further and further in debt. And the person who's holding on to that debt says, okay, you're going to be my slave. You're going to be owned by me. And what a redeemer is usually a family member, a wealthier family member would come in and say, hey, I'll pay off this debt. No, they're not going to be that way. And so that's what a redeemer is. They also might be, if let's say, because males would inherit the property, if the man and his wife had either no children or children that were female who couldn't inherit the land. Land was huge during this time for Israel. Remember that's God's promise. God's promise was the land. It wasn't, money or anything. It was the land. So for the Israelite, land was so precious, and to be lost because you didn't have a male heir would be terrible. And so a person from like a relative or whatever would come in and buy that land. To keep it within, the family, to keep it within, the relatives of the Israelites, keep it within the Israelites. And so this idea of God, the Redeemer, God has purchased us. God has purchased, not us because we're talking about the Israelites here, but he has purchased us. But God has purchased the Israelites. He has paid that price for them. And, so usually the person that's being redeemed is always like a weaker person or weaker people. And so God, the stronger one, comes in and rescues and purchases the people of Israel. And so that's what God is speaking here. And so when we take a look at this, and again, he's doing this double who here, this who is like me, who has announced from of old things to have come. Jesus said, or God says, I'm the only one who's done that. And what you need to do, Israel, and he proclaims it there in verse 8, in the middle of verse 8, you need to continue to be my witnesses. And continue to be my witnesses regardless what it looks like out there, regardless what your life in Babylon is looking like. You need to continue to be my witnesses, continue to be my people. And that's very important here. And God is giving them encouragement. Do not be afraid. Do not, fear. I am with you. You have nothing to fear. And there is no other God. And again, he's called the Redeemer. He's called the first and the last. So that sort of tells you a little bit about, God is eternal. He's with us at all time. And God is the rock. And the rock is more like really a source of protection. God, when we say he's my rock, or she's my rock, that's a source of help and protection. So God is called a rock here. So there's a lot of things, in these three verses, God is called many, many different things. But he's saying, hey, I have all these names, but I am he. I am the one true God. Don't give up hope. Don't give up hope regardless of the circumstances. Continue practicing your faith. Do not fall to the other gods that are the small gods that are in Babylon. Continue to do the work that's pleasing to me, and not worry about the ideologies of the people living around you. And that's what God is saying to his people. And so I wonder how this applies to today's reading, or today's time. And I think is the same message, that we despite the circumstances, despite COVID-19, despite the turmoil that's happening within our country, with equality issues, despite the divisions that we have, between Republicans and Democrats, liberals and Republicans, mask wearers and mask not wearers. I don't know if that's a word, but people who don't wear masks. It's just, there's so many divisions in this country. And God is saying, no, do not fear. Despite what it looks like, do not fear. Do not be afraid. Continue to be my witnesses. Continue bringing the love of Jesus Christ to people, all people. And do not fear, because I am the rock. I am the first and the last. And don't worry about what's happening around you, because God is present. God is with us, even in these times too. May the peace of the Lord be with you always.